These thoughts up in my head, things I never did. I took some L's, but I'm still here. I got these thoughts up in my head. I toss and turn about some things I never said. I got regrets about some things I never did. I took some risks and took some L's, but I'm still here. And I know.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the OverthinkingThoughtsPod. I'm your host, Ed, and as always, journey with me as we pursue greatness in a world full of chaos. Here we are, another week, episode 32. We are at 32 episodes. Thank you to each and every one of you that have taken the time to watch the videos on TikTok, watch the videos on YouTube, stream the podcast where all streaming episodes are. Thank you so much for your support. Shout out to all the new followers over at TikTok. I hope that you're able to get something out of what we're doing here with this podcast. But for those of you that are new, it's a simple concept. Trying to take our time with this overthinking, step back and really see what God has for us as we go through our journeys in life. And everybody has their respective journeys. So we just want to make sure that as we're going through this, we don't feel overwhelmed or anxious or overthink everything. So we want to take some time to really see where we are, taking one step at a time and trust God. And we'll talk about that in this episode today. Before I get started, I want to send a special shout out and prayer to my homie Jurian. He hit me up today asking for some prayer. And Jurian, I know that God is with you, and do something a little different today. Jurian, I'm gonna pray for you right now because you asked me for prayer. So I want to make sure that you hear it and you receive it. So Father God, thank you for Jurian, and ask that you just bless him in this situation, be with him, be in his heart, help him to trust in you as he goes through this part of life, that he journeys with you on this part of life, that he puts his full trust and just allows you to be who you are, Lord, a healer, a provider, a protector, the beginning and all those things, Lord. We just thank you for being there. We just pray for Jurian, his safety, his health, his well-being, for him to know that you are with him, that you are always with him, that no matter where he goes or what he does, your presence is always within him, and that you are guiding him in the right direction, and that he is trusting and holding your hand as he is walking through faith and walking in faith. So we thank you for Jurian. We thank you for just his life and what he's done on this earth. And we just ask, Lord, that you continue to bless him and allow him to heal and to be the best that he can be, Lord. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Jurian, I hope you feel good, bro. Jurian was one of my probably one of the first people that I've ever prayed for. I've prayed for people, but first player that I coached and that I knew, like, going into his first year, like, I coached JV. So there's like certain people we knew, like, oh yeah, they'll be back sophomore year. We can work on this, and this. And then, like, his first year, I remember looking at some of the coaches and being like, yeah, he's going varsity right after. So he had a great run. He actually got a state championship as well, too. So shout out to you, bro, and hope you're doing well. But all right. With that being said, we'll walk into the episode, and kind of, for those of you that, like I said, are new to this or watching this, man, you can catch us in all streaming platforms. We are on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Google Podcasts. You can catch me on YouTube as well at the Overthinking Thoughts Pod there. Also on Instagram and TikTok. So if you want to follow us over on TikTok, I'm there at Overthinking Thoughts Pod. And then you can also follow me on Instagram at Overthinking Thoughts Pod. Just trying to make sure we get the clips out, try to do something every week, try to stay consistent with what we do. All right. So with that being said, let's jump to the episode. Episode 32 is called Restless, because I feel like, well, I was up trying to figure out what I wanted to kind of talk about, and a lot of stuff was going through my head, like, talk about this, talk about that, do this, do that, and it was just so much. And mind you, it was like probably 1 or 2 in the morning. I stayed up and watched a lot of basketball, but at the same time, I feel like when your mind is racing and you don't have that time to just relax, you are finding yourself in a state of restlessness where you're just thinking one thing after the other. And I guess my opening thought is that we live in a world where everything is fast paced. And if you don't take time to navigate correctly, you'll find yourself in the dead end, exhausted, overwhelmed, and way out of gas. And I think the world has designed it that way because when you look at everything, it's like I gotta grind, I gotta get this, I gotta do that, I gotta make this money, and then I gotta go here, and then I gotta go do this, and then how then I gotta go take care of this. And it's like them people that say, "Man, I don't sleep, I don't get tired." Yeah, you do. Stop lying. Everybody gets tired. At some point, your body needs to rest because if you don't do it, your body will do it for you. I remember being like in a previous job where like my mind was on 24/7. I felt like even when I was resting, I was still thinking about all the stuff I had to do, then wake up the next day and then have to be there. And then I got to make all these decisions. And then here I am trying to figure out like what I do in this aspect. Now I got to go to the next thing. And then I got to go to the next thing. And then I get home and I don't have all that time to really like sit and relax because I felt like I just had to be fast paced and move. And what I learned was it was taking a lot from my family, it was taking a lot from my kids, it was taking a lot from my wife. I didn't even have time for myself. I felt like there was no need for me to have self care because I had to care for everything else, which is a dangerous thing and can lead to burnout physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And I just realized like if I'm going 100 miles per hour and I don't stop, I'm going to eventually reach the point where I'm not gonna be good to anybody. So I had to just like step back and analyze what I was doing. And I think also with that, as we're going that fast, because we don't know, you know what I'm saying? You don't really know when your time is your time. But at the same time, you also have to trust God's timing and trust that He's got you. And when you're in these moments, know that He's got you covered. So in Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30, he states, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So to kind of break that down to verse 28, where he's talking about come to me, all who are basically in labor and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. He's telling you up front, like he's got you covered. So in essence, it's not necessarily physical rest. It's more so as rest for the soul. So the path to the Father through Jesus is not one of weary labor and heavy work. Jesus' early analogy about the path to life being narrow and difficult is entirely separate and speaking from a different perspective. From the view of the world, following Christ means taking on difficult circumstances and giving up worldly pleasures. From the view of eternity, of salvation, following Christ means giving up the impossible task of carrying our own sin. When we're rushing, when we're doing things, we can make decisions that end up falling into the category of sin because we might be neglecting family. We're not honoring our time with God. We're not we're not loving our neighbor correctly because maybe we're upset with them or whatever, right? And so there's all these things that happen when you're rushing, and why going back to rushing the process, disrupting the journey, right? So God's telling you like come to me because you have all these things and you feel like you got to tackle every single thing on your own. I'm telling you that I will give you that rest and give you that peace, but you got to trust in me. So when you go to verse 29 where it talks about taking on the yoke, right? So the implication is to allow Jesus to put his own yoke on us the way a farmer would put one on his livestock. It means giving Jesus control and letting him direct our efforts. The work he has will not be difficult, Jesus says. He wants them to learn from him. Unlike the Pharisees, Jesus insists that he is gentle, he is lowly in heart. He has not come to add to their burden, but to give them rest for their souls. Now, understand, like, he's not offering freedom from commitment. The yoke is still yoke. It still comes with demands from a holy God. But the Apostle John would later write that obedience to the God we love is not burdensome. Worldly aspirations will tell you you have to do everything all at once and get it now. And then, work now, rest when you dead type mentality, right? Well, how are you gonna enjoy what you're doing if when it's the end and you're like, I did all this, but I never had that time, you know? Um, it's unfortunate because that's how we're wired. And the one thing I remember seeing this post where like this job had posted something about on their like marquee where it was like, rest in peace to our employee. He was such a good soul, and he'll dearly be missed. And then on the other side of that was now hiring. It's that you could be replaced just like that, man. Like, it's so crazy how that happened. It was so quick, and it just lets you know like time is precious. And if you let the world and other people manage your time, then eventually you will run out of the time that you needed in order for you to be where you needed to be because you didn't trust God in the first place. So, outside of that, we have to allow God to work within us and we can take his yoke. He gives that to us. When you go to verse 30 and it's talking about the yoke is easy and the burden is light. And of course, all this is from Bible Ref. Let me shout that out. But it says, when Jesus said earlier that the path to life was narrow and difficult, he was speaking of how the unbelieving world sees the Christian life. To them, it means giving up earthly pleasures and taking on things like persecution. But in the terms of salvation, however, what Christ offers is much easier than the impossible task of earning one's own salvation. Goes back to trying to do it on your own. You cannot do this on your own. You cannot physically carry all of this stuff by yourself and walk. It's just not going to work. God puts people in place, opportunities in place, certain doors that will open for you to get to where you need to be, and also place certain people and doors in front of you to stop you from going down a path that you don't need to be in, or the direction of which you're going might not be where you need to head. And yet when you trust him, he'll guide you to where you need to be. That's when you start using that discernment and you'll start seeing things and being like, oh no, I don't need to be here. Case in point, man, let me tell you what, as a coach, and some of my players can relate to this, I used to be on them refs, man. And it happened again in my son's basketball game. And I didn't agree with a lot of the calls. I didn't feel like things were going well. And a referee calls a late whistle. One of our kids was up in the air, got pushed in the back, and we were upset just because we weren't getting calls. And then he's telling us to calm. What I think what triggered it for me was he's like, "You guys need to calm down. That's why the kids are acting out of control." And I just was like, "What?" I didn't think first. I just said the kids are acting that way because you're not calling anything. And so then he's like, "Well, did I call it?" And I told him, and I felt so bad afterwards. I was like, "It took you long enough." And the look he gave me, you could tell like it hurt. And I don't know. In my previous days, I would have looked at the referee, he would have looked at me like that, I wouldn't went my way. But something told me like, I'm trying to make sure these kids don't react crazy. And after the game, I walked up to him, I told him, I said, "Man, I was wrong. My emotions got the best of me." Shook hands, went our separate way, and he was like, "It's all good. Like, it gets emotional, we're straight." And it was like what it was, but I was like, "Dang, I should have never even been in that position." But that comes with discernment, and it comes with God working on you too, because when you allow God to work, you start to see things differently. Your eyes are open to new endeavors and new opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have chased after because you were stuck in your old ways. But when God's working, God is cleansing. When God's cleansing, God is opening all types of doors and opportunities for you. And so you just have to be patient in the timing. You have to be patient and trusting. And you also can come to God because God's going to give you that rest for your soul. So you're not so stressed out all the time. Um, which I'm going to kind of switch gears on this now, is that when we're looking for rest and when we're looking for peace, if God doesn't move as quickly as we want him to, we have our own way of coping, or just like, fine, I'll do it myself. Like most men I know, when they're trying to figure stuff out, they kind of block everybody else out and they just are like, "I'll do it myself. I don't need whatever." So they take on all these burdens, and a lot of them are hidden because what happens is that they don't want you. I'm guilty of this. They don't want you to think like anything's wrong. That's just how you've been taught. Like as a man, you're just like, nah, you just got to toughen up. You got to go through it. You got to do this and do that. And you're just like, yeah, but I'm tired. Like, and sometimes You might feel like rushing because you're in a storm and you're trying to get out. You might be in debt. You might be in between jobs. You might be, ill, whatever the case may be. And so you start doing things in overdrive, and then you're missing the key points that you need in order to get to where you actually need to be. And then you're trying to find peace, but it feels like the sea is so rough. And if you fall, you might drown. And we know, like in the Bible, there's a story of where Jesus is on the boat and the storm hits, and people on the boat are like, "Oh my God, like what are we supposed to do?" And Jesus, like he just right there asleep. Like how you sleep and everything going crazy, right? Like think about that. Jesus is in the boat, or let me change that. Jesus is currently with you in whatever situation you're facing. And it seems like the more you go through it, the heavier the rain gets, the heavier the burden gets. And you're like, okay, God, I prayed, but the storm's still here. That's day one. Okay, fine. Okay, cool. Okay, God, I'm praying again. It's day two. Ain't nothing changed. Day three, nothing changed. A week, month, several months. And you're like, yo, what are you doing, God? Like, I keep talking to you. You just sitting right here and you acting like ain't nothing going on. I thought that you was supposed to be with me, and now you go and you're disrupting him. And Matthew 8:26 says, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. He calmed the storm. So if he did it then, what makes you think that he won't do it for you now? Right? It is so difficult, I think, that when it doesn't happen instantly, we end up wanting to do it on our own because it's not happening in the time frame that we feel is good for us. And then we're in it by ourselves, or we feel like we're in it by ourselves because we're not even acknowledging that God is there. God's just resting because God already knows what's going to happen. He just wants us to do the one thing: trust. So Bible Ref tells us about this verse. It says, when Jesus wakes up, his first response is not to immediately save them. Instead, he asks them, why are they afraid, and chides their lack of faith. His meaning seems to be that the disciples should be more assured of his ability to save than they are afraid. His primary concern for those who would follow him is that they trust him. We got to trust. So when we rushing around trying to get from point A to point B, and then we're wondering why we so unfulfilled when we get there, it's because we didn't trust God to get there on his time. We wanted to do it on our time because we felt like we were already prepared. And then you get to that point and you're like, I have no clue of what I'm doing. And then we turn back like, okay, God, like it's me again. Didn't trust you the first time. Guess I'll trust you this time. And then even sometimes it's stubborn and we keep going. And one thing that we have to not do, and I wanted to touch on this, was this part. So when we feel that God doesn't answer right away, sometimes we take matters into our own hands. We turn to vices to fill the void that only God can fill. In return, we are unfulfilled, and we end up back at start with the same emotions as before. So a lot of times when the storm hits, we turn to vices, things that we feel like can fulfill that void. We're stressed, or we missing a loved one, or we lost a job, or you're not getting recognition you deserve, and you fall into a depression or a funk. You're overthinking the fact that you're in this position for a reason, because all you can see is the darkness, but you're not giving yourself grace or hope that there's light at the end. And so what happens is that you dive into things that are darker. Name your vice. I mean, you have alcoholism, you've got drug use, you got pornography, you've got um, you know, acceptance and trying to overindulge in things. You got gluttony. Like, pick your poison on what it is that could be a vice, right? And it's not so much that you are that sin, it's just that there's something deeper that you're trying to fulfill, and you're using that as your crutch or your quote unquote coping mechanism. The alcohol usage will slowly deteriorate your body. The drug usage will deteriorate your body. The pornography will deteriorate your mind, body, and soul. overindulgence will start to slow things down. And amazingly, what happens is that these vices aren't actually helpful, but they're actually more harmful than what you think they are. And learning and living life and learning how to use discernment, I think it's very important for you to find if you're rushing or you don't feel like you can get rest. Well, what is it that's keeping you up? What is that bothering you? What is it that when you go to that vice and then you wake up the next day and you still feel empty, what are you trying to fulfill? I think that's what that is. For me, I remember it was always just acceptance, comfort, love, acknowledgement. But I just was like, man, I ain't getting it. So I'm gonna do my own thing. And then you realize as you start doing your own thing and there's this nudge, you keep getting tapped on your shoulder, like, hey, stop that. And you're like, yeah, but nothing's happened yet. So I gotta do something because I don't feel well. And it's like tap, tap, stop. But I still don't feel good. What am I supposed to do, God? And then some of us turn away, and then we end up back in the same cycle where we started. And it reminds me of a TikTok I saw earlier where this guy was talking about like he didn't really say what it was like or what the addiction or what the vice was or whatever like that, but it was like he was sitting there and he's like, I'm resisting the urge. All right, I'm trying to flee. But the feeling's too strong. Maybe if I just okay, no, and then eventually he indulges, and then everything turns red, and he's sitting there, and right after he indulges, he feels this shame, and then he looks up, God's sitting right in front of him. And he says, oh, God, you're here. Get me out of this. And very similar to how it was when the storm hit and the boat was there, God's like, nah, not yet. I'm not just going to pull you out of this. And he's like, wait, what do you mean? Like, I can't do this on my own. I'm trying to fight it, but I can't. And then he said, you're only talking to me when it's completed and you're in too deep, but you're never talking to me before when you start to sense it. And I really thought that that was important because when we down bad, we'd be like, okay, God, I look, I'd have had the moments. Oh Lord, if you get me out of this, I'll never do it again. And then the next day, hey, what a party! Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that does not work. But in that midst, it was like, let's talk. He's like, you're in it right now. Let's talk in it so I can build you out of it. But the biggest takeaway I took from that was we will condemn ourselves when we fail because in our mind, we're trying to be perfect. God will meet us exactly where we are, extend his hand and say, okay, you're in this mess. Let's walk through how we can get out. But the first thing you need to know is I'm here. I've always been here and I always will be here. And I can promise you that. Never will I leave you nor forsake you. That's what he said. That's what he said. So to have that, right, is such a comforting and promising piece to our lives that if we just took the time to acknowledge it, I feel like it would just make for a better walk. But there's so many distractions around us, and you're like, man, but Lord, I'm not making enough money, so I gotta go do all these other things. Maybe you're not in that position yet because God knows if you get there, you might not manage your money correctly. And everything that you plan for your family now falls because you didn't truly trust where God was taking you. Maybe you had to manage the little bit of money you had. So that way, when you did get the bigger amount of money, you knew not to overindulge. But maybe you got to that point and you're like, all right, nah, we getting this, we got money. And then next thing you know, you looking at the bank account like, what you mean bankrupt? But we got all this stuff. Did you invest properly? Did you manage it properly? You feel what I'm saying? Like, or if we spiral, what I don't want us to do is get so overwhelmed in our thoughts that we lose sight of where we're supposed to be and where God is, because that happens more often than not. I will admit that that happens to me a lot because in the midst of overthinking, I have to pull myself out and I have to remember, well, what's true? What am I adding to make myself feel overwhelmed and anxious? And how do I then face that and say, this isn't real without going down a path of, I don't even want to call it comfort, temporary relief. Let's call it that temporary relief. And then in the very same moment of the quote unquote relief, you go right back to feeling like you're lost again. So it's like, do the work in the beginning. Trust God in the beginning, not when you're falling. Most of us have turned to God when we're falling, but not all of us will turn to God when we're succeeding. Not all of us will turn to God when we're on top. We only want God to save us when things are going bad, but we never want God's presence or safetyness when we're doing good. Because what we fail to realize is even when we're doing good, the enemy's still out there. Why would you not want God to protect you when you're in that position? Think about that. But I think when you're rushing, that's what happens. And in the midst of all of this rushing and all of this movement and all of these thoughts and all of the stuff that we're trying to do, you ever notice that you still, even when you get it, you still feel so exhausted, but you feel like you still have to keep going? Why? It's because you haven't found the peace. You haven't allowed God to work with you. You haven't. Um, I've been jamming this Christian song lately by, I think his name's Alex Jean. It's called Walking in Peace. They call him a Christian pop smoke. So if you're into that, like, and it's just because his voice. The content's way different, but this guy, he's got this song called Walking in Peace, and he talks about just giving it to God and being able to trust in him. And first of all, the song is great. Second of all, his voice is like, it's unique, but it's dope. And then third, the concept. There's no fear when you're walking with God and when you're in peace because you already know that God's gonna take care of it. And that, like, is something that I'm trying to get to. It's something where I want us to get to. The whole point of this podcast where we talk about overthinking is to stop ourselves from allowing our mind to run so fast that we don't give it the proper chance to rest. As much as we need like self-care, our mind needs to self-care too. We need to allow our brains to kind of relax sometimes because we'll just be going and going and going and going and going. And we're like, okay, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta do this. And blah, 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 blah. You lose sight, man. I was in that position. I lost sight. I would come home. I'd be sitting there. My youngest kid was asleep. My oldest son, I would hug real quick. He got to go to bed. And then my wife and I, like, our conversations were jaded because I couldn't even hear how her day went because I was coming in with all of the day's stress, all of the day's problems, all of the day's issues, and trying to figure out, how do I solve it? How do I get to here? How do I make this right tomorrow? And then when the next problem comes, how do I do this and do that? And the whole time she was sitting there suffering and I couldn't see it. And I feel guilty about it because I'm like, I was selfish. I'm thinking I'm the only person that's dealing with stuff. She got 2 kids, and my boys, I love my boys, but they wild. They numbskulls, little gremlins. They crazy, eating us out of house and home. The youngest one throwing the toys all over the place. The oldest one don't want to pick up nothing, which is typical. It's typical. It's what kids do. It's what actually, to step back when you see all that, it actually makes you grateful for being a parent because you can see all that, and then as you get older and these kids really start to latch to you, they start realizing, like, I see why you would tell us to do these things or do that things. My oldest son is starting to see that. My youngest son, well, he's just in the beginning stages. But I didn't see all the stuff that she was going through. I didn't understand the sacrifice she was making that was allowing me to do the things that I felt like I needed to do. It wasn't until I had to sacrifice something that I love that I realized the person who I love was much greater than what I was in. And that changes the narrative. Because when that happened, there was an experience that there was just this feeling of like, wow, I feel like I can breathe. You know how good it feels to be able to breathe and rest? That's why it's so important. That's why this is called Restless, because I know some of you feel that way right now. You feel like you got to keep going. You feel like you don't have enough. Or that you don't have enough. You feel like, I'm just not getting to where I need to be, and I got to do this and I got to do that. And what do I do? How do I make it? How do I do this? How do I do that? How about you stop and trust God? and know that he will give you rest for your soul if you just believe in him. It's pretty simple. You don't have to run around like crazy in this world when God is the one that's going to provide you with the ultimate not the ultimate sacrifice. God gave the ultimate sacrifice when he gave his only son. And God gave you peace when he decided to die for you. Keep that in mind. I'm running out of time, but know this. I believe in you. Go believe in yourself. All right. It's my podcast. We out.
These thoughts up in my head. Things I never did. I took some L's, but I'm still here. I got these thoughts up in my head. I toss and turn about some things I never said. I got regrets about some things I never did. I took some risks and took some L's, but I'm still here. And I know.